Hello, friends, and welcome once again. Let's do it live. We've turned on the live button for a live edition of Syracuse Sports. You got Brent Axe, you got Chris Carlson, syracuse.com. Happy March Madness to you, Chris. The tournament is underway. Brackets are already falling. And a question we're going to ask today is, like, what do we do and who do we root for when March Madness comes and Syracuse isn't around? I'll tell you who we're not rooting for. Louisville. Way to go, Louisville. We're 2 hours into this thing, then the ACC's down a team. Creighton knocks them off. Way to go. Way to go, Birds.
Yeah, one of those, there were only four, and now there's three, and one of them was a play-in team, and, it appears that the ACC, they have an uphill climb to redeem themselves and be that NCAA tournament wonder that they've often been.
Not the greatest showing from the supposed best conference in college basketball not too long ago. So we are going to discuss that. What do you do when March Madness rolls around and for the fourth straight year, Syracuse is not there? Something that Syracuse fans have unfortunately gotten a little used to in the past few years. Spring football is blooming. Spring is here. We've had spring-like weather here in Syracuse, New York this week, which has been great. So we're certainly going to discuss that. And Fran Brown wants to go to Boulder for the spring. Don't think it's going to happen this year, but I kind of like where his head's at on that. And our Syracuse Sports Insiders have some great thoughts. Yeah, Chris and I have volunteered for that trip, if and when it happens, for sure. Got some family out there in Colorado, so always willing to make that trip out west. And some Syracuse Sports Insiders had some great questions and comments we're going to get to, Chris. It's right there on your screen. If you would like to become a Syracuse Sports Insider and have exclusive text message access to me, it's a great time of year to do it, guys, because spring football starts on Friday. We are going to be there. And the first thing that Chris, Javon Edmonds, and I will do when we walk out of practice is text you what we saw, photos, pictures, observations, quotes from players and coaches. You can text me anytime with your thoughts, your opinions, your questions. You get highlighted exclusively on this live pod and the Syracuse Sports Podcast as well. So a great time to be a Syracuse Sports Insider. But Chris, turn the floor over to you. I'm going to ask a broad question here, that sometimes broad questions bring about great answers. Spring football, what are you thinking about? We walk in there tomorrow, just what's on your mind before we actually see some things to report on?
So I was thinking about this, and I was thinking back to last year, and I think it was the first spring practice that you and I think it was the first spring practice, and like within the first sort of 3 minutes of throwing, we were watching Kyle McCord and the other Syracuse quarterbacks, and we looked at each other and we were like, oh, like one of these doesn't belong here. like Kyle was just different than the other guys throwing the ball. And like, I'm not a football genius. Like if any of those guys were throwing alone, I would think they were all good. Like they're all talented. But when you see them like lined up next to each other, it is like, oh, like one of these guys is very different than the other guys. So I was thinking about who might be that guy, that we have that reaction to this year. And I was thinking, right, like Jamie Tremble is interesting to me. He has tremendous, he came in with a tremendous recruiting pedigree, has tremendous, his family is full of athletes. They need to replace Aronde Gadsden. He seems like the guy to do it. He seems the most likely to be that like, oh, wow, player for me. That's what I've sort of been thinking about today as I sort of get myself ready to head out there tomorrow.
Kyle McCord is the most, he's different guy I think I've seen at any position in recent memory because, like you said.
And I still wasn't smart enough to like know that he was going to be great, right? But I didn't trust myself enough.
But there are guys that pop like that, and it was different at spring ball last year. It wasn't just McCord because they just made this huge immediate impact in the portal, and it was freshmen too. I had a spring football crush on Yassine Willis last spring because he just looked bigger and faster and stronger than your average freshman. And this was a guy who came in early, and a bunch of these guys have come in early. And I think it's always the new guys, right? It's the transfers, which they weren't quite as active in the portal as they were when Fran took over for Dino, but still, there's enough new players that you're going to say, how do they fit in? Of course, the quarterback position jumps right to the page in terms of the competition, and is Ricky Collins going to stand out in the same way that Kyle McCord did. He's younger than McCord. It's not a apples to apples comparison, but do you say, okay, now I get it, why they targeted him, why they gave him that money to come in, and will they try to, Javon Edmonds and I talked about this a bit in a pod that will come out tomorrow, but I'm intrigued by how the coaching staff is going to continue to try to make this a competition if it's not, if that makes sense. Like if we go to practice, we're like, come on, unless Ricky Collins, falls off a cliff here, he's the guy. I don't know if that's what we're going to see. There's a distinct difference in this camp versus a year ago when, we had to see Kyle throw the ball just to make sure, but I think we kind of knew from the minute he got on campus who the man was because he had a pedigree. He had I could watch the film, I could turn it up, I could talk to people, our friends from cleveland.com that do an amazing job covering him, and I walked into that practice with just like, all right, I'm going to check that box. This time I'm walking in saying, I think I know what to look for, but it's much more of a mystery at this point.
Yeah, you knew Kyle didn't transfer from Ohio State, where he likely would have had he would have been the favorite to be the starter. Even the worst reading I think of Ohio State, is hey, McCord was your starter last year. He probably he might have to compete for his job again, but he's the favorite. And he picked Syracuse, right? I mean, he didn't come here to not start. Ricky Collins' situation is a little different. He had to get out from under the bottom of the depth chart, not the bottom, but he wasn't going to start next year. So, there's a chance that he's competing here versus he's going to walk into a starting spot. Now, do I think Syracuse wants him to start? Yes. Does the coaching staff certainly hope that he's starting, when the season opener comes around next year? Yes. But you're right. From an experience standpoint, from a sort of veteran, has played a lot of football standpoint, it is a different situation this year.
I'm going to say this too. I don't think Luke Carney can win the job. He's a freshman. That's a lot to put on his shoulders. Ricky Collins isn't much older than a freshman, don't get me wrong, but he's got a head start in this department, and I think his physical attributes are a little more developed at this point. But Luke Carney, I need to remind people, won 4 state championships in the history of Texas high school football. Do you know how long that list is? It's Luke Carney, and that's it. In terms of quarterbacks, he threw for over 10,000 yards. He is mobile. He was a threat with his legs as well as Ricky Collins is. So that's one thing to really keep an eye on, Chris, is how Jeff Nixon gets in there with the screwdriver and adjusts the offense for someone that can use their legs. Kyle McCord, I think, had better mobility than people give him credit for. Just look at that touchdown run he had against Stanford. He could escape trouble if he needed to, but no one would say it's a weapon. It's something we build into the game plan, right? Unless you're just completely trying to fool the defense, like the Peyton Manning, reverse once in a while, just because you knew nobody was paying attention, right? But most of the quarterbacks on the roster now, Collins, Williams, MJ Jr., and even Luke Carney, are all threats with their feet. So I think that's one thing to keep an eye on. And I think I've learned this, Chris. You get older, you get a little more humble, and our insiders have been asking great questions because they're just as intrigued with this quarterback position as anybody. But I think I've learned you have to know when to say, I don't know. Mm-hmm. And guys, I don't know. They have done nothing of value. These workouts, they're not practices. They're out there running at 6 a.m. and they're hitting the weight room and they're doing all these things. That doesn't tell me how good of a quarterback you are. So to say who's got the edge right now, I mean, I think Ricky Collins has the edge in terms of he's got a little more of a pedigree. He comes from LSU. He's got the attributes, and they went out and sought him and paid for him. But from a football standpoint, I don't know. And that's what's going to be great about the next 3 weeks is will I have a better sense of that on April 12th when they play that spring game? Okay, a few weeks ago I wasn't quite sure, but now I know. I think I knew walking in last year with McCord. I don't know coming in. And that's fun. That's intriguing. That's going to be something to keep an eye on during camp.
Yeah, we can probably promise the Syracuse Sports Insiders that within 2 minutes of us leaving practice, they will have a video of Ricky Collins throwing the ball.
Yes, we can.
I suspect that is the first thing that we will do for you. Is
absolutely
you will get a look at that quarterback throwing the ball.
So that's tomorrow afternoon. It's they're doing late afternoon practices. I believe they start about 4, a little after 4 o'clock. So just so you guys know the timing on that, and we will be all over spring ball. Chris, Javon, and I over the next few weeks. into the spring game. They actually have a couple practices after the spring game, too, on April 12th. So let's lock in for that. Something I hope.
Go ahead.
I was say, go ahead.
I was going to say that there are a couple other guys, like, right, in terms of like getting our eyes on them, like
Yes.
Naquil Bertrand, the tackle from Alabama, redshirt freshman last year. So redshirt sophomore. He's 6'6", 320. Like, can he start at tackle next season? That's an interesting one. We're gonna get our first look at Byron Washington, the 6'8", 380 tackle from Texas. Like, I don't think he can probably start as a freshman. It's just so hard to to be on the offensive line as a freshman. But like, all right, what kind of moving is he capable of doing at that size, right? Like, what kind of mover is he at that size, and what does he look like down the line? And then like two other guys who I thought about along the Jamie Trumbull line where they might just like look different is, Devin Grant and Emmanuel Ross. Obviously we know them, but like those are two guys that like, they could make a jump. Like, they are physical standouts, and, they might just look like absolute powerhouses when we go out there.
Great question. Who's the number one receiver? No offense to Trevor Pena. I don't think he's the number one receiver. Trevor's just in a different category. I'm a Buffalo Bills fan. I see him as kind of a Khalil Shakur kind of guy. He's not the top receiver, but he's a weapon, and he's somebody that no matter who wins the quarterback job is going to be very thankful is still on this roster, and as a captain and as a leader. I don't see him as a number one receiver, though. So who is that target? We're talking a lot about new guys. How about the guys that are stepping up? Does Yassine Willis look like a number one running back? How healthy is Will Nixon? Remember, who was starting to get some reps, was the number two guy until he got hurt last year. Is Zeed Haynes practicing, right? The big mystery from last year. I'm leaving out a bunch of questions here. We'll answer as many as we can throughout spring ball, but the anticipation for spring practice, Chris, is something that I just enjoy that, because if the basketball team's going to be out of the tournament for the fourth straight year, you want to feel like something is big this time of the year. Not that lacrosse isn't. I'm immersed in lacrosse. I'm into it. It's a good team, but they're still just kind of warming up. All the big games have yet to be on the schedule. They've played a couple big ones, don't get me wrong, but now they're really starting to hit their groove in lacrosse, but that's more of an April on-ramp to the big games, whereas
Memorial Day Chris
will be back around soon. Looking forward to that, right? So to have something that feels big in March be football, I like that, because I am a spring football guy. I'm a football guy to begin with. So to walk into these practices and they mean a lot, and and you can feel that the fan base is as immersed in this as ever, it's a good feeling to know that this is what people are into.
It feels, and I'm maybe I'm shortchanging that 2019 season, because like I know, we were talking about ACC titles, a little bit that year after the 10-win season by Dino, but like it feels different, right?
Yeah.
Like it just feels different under Fran, because of the excitement of last year, because of the level of recruits like he's bringing in, where it's like, oh, like I want to lay eyes on this guy. Like, yes. I want to see this guy. Like, I don't feel like I felt that way in 2019, even though Syracuse, maybe about DeVito, right?
Yes.
Maybe about Tommy
yeah.
and how he was going to throw. That might've been the place where the enthusiasm was just as high. But in terms of like I don't recall experiencing this in my time around Syracuse football.
Not at all. There were times, frankly, I'd walk out of spring ball, and I know who the football guys are, and they're the diehards, and they eat up everything. But beyond them, I'd be like, does anybody care about this? I'll report it, and I'll tweet it, and I'll write the stories. But I'm like, is anybody really into this? I absolutely, with 100% authority, no, that's not the case. If anything, the interest has never been higher. So that is going to be great. And keep a lookout on the text line on syracuse.com. And of course, here on the pods, we're going to be doing plenty of spring practice pods throughout spring ball. Chris, a direction that Fran Brown wants to take spring ball is very interesting. As that came up earlier this week, Deion Sanders said, hey, let's bring in somebody. Let's play a real game in spring ball. And Fran Brown stepped up and raised his hand on X. Said, we'll come out for a few days. This is the genius of Fran Brown and how he gets this part of the game, Chris. Fran Brown full well knows you can't do that right now. That's an NCAA rule, but who cares? Put it out there. Say, we'll do it. We'll come out there, get the conversation going, and you're in the machine for a good 2 days, right? People are buzzing about it on social media. Fran Brown and Deion Sanders get a lot of attention no matter what they say these days. So for the two of them to want to unite forces and kind of a Super Friends edition of spring football, that move was genius by Fran. And I do think it's going to enact some change. This is something coaches have been talking about for a while, but these things sometimes, for lack of a better term, Chris, have to go viral to make change sometimes. And I feel like Fran and Deion are like, yeah, we'll do it. We'll lead the way on this. And we're not going to see it this year because logistics and the rules, it's just not going to happen that quickly. But I'm feeling pretty good in 2026 about booking a trip out to Boulder. What do you think?
You know, I think you hit it right on the head. Like, and I did not, like, at first, like, I saw it and I was like, well, they can't do this. Like, right? Like, there's all these headlines about something that, like, can't happen. Like, why are people getting so worked up over something? Like, they can't change the rules in a month to accommodate that. Like, everybody just calm down, right? That was my first initial curmudgeonly, like, you can't do that, kids, reaction. And, you know, as I've sort of thought about it, like, yes, like Fran, Deion is the lightning rod, and like Fran attached himself to that rocket and was like, I'm going to put Syracuse football in this national conversation that Deion is having right now. And that is what happened. And, you know, it is also who Fran is, right? Like, Fran loves to compete. That is a thing. Like,
sure.
If Fran could go, if Fran could go out to Colorado, would he? I think he probably would. Like, I think he probably really would, if that opportunity existed, do it. And I think it is and I think if you want the spring to change, like, that is the best way to make it happen, right? That is the best way to start a conversation. It is the best way to, like, sort of force the issue. And yeah, I'm with you. Like, I think that is a thing that we will see at some point. We will see a Syracuse-Colorado joint practice.
And you know why we're going to see it? Because everybody wins. The teams win because they get real competition. The networks win because they get better programming. I mean, as much as I love football, I'll throw up some of these spring games and fall asleep halfway through because it's not interesting. Nobody wants to get hurt. And I think they would work that out so it would be a light scrimmage between the two because you don't want to lose anybody in spring ball. But just that juice and the practices together and the quotes that would come out of that, the ACC network would love it. Everybody checks the box, right? And for Syracuse to be at the front of the line of something that would innovate college football. I mean, we're not talking about like the invention of the forward pass here, but it's enough that it's different and everybody's talking about you. And it's just another example of how Fran can interject himself into the conversation. And I'll be nice. I'm not going to name some names here. Let's just say, though, there's some other coaches up there at Syracuse that can learn a lesson from this, that do not do this and don't understand this part of the gig, particularly when you are, I get we're in the transfer portal era, but you're still recruiting 16, 17, and 18-year-olds that see this stuff on the social media platform of your choice. And like, that's cool, and it makes you pop, and it makes you stand out in an era where it's very hard to do that in traditional means, right? Fran gets that, right? Just by sending a tweet, he knows that the traditional media, if you will, and the podcasts and the social media sites are just all going to swarm on this. And sometimes this stuff only lasts for like 20 minutes, and then you scroll and something else gets your attention. But if it gets your attention even that long these days, you got to do it. And I think Fran hit the nail on the head just by sending a tweet. They took you 30 seconds. But we'll come out there, right? With not even thinking about, John Wildhack's probably like, you want to do what? No, we can't do that. Like, but we can't pay for that right now, whatever the case may be. Who cares? Get the conversation going. Get the buzz going. It was great.
Yep. To your point, too, in terms of revenue, right? We are in a world now where $20.5 million a year for athletes. Schools have to find it. So, like, if there's money to be made from playing a spring game against somebody else, they'll play that game. Like they will play that game if it's going to help schools financially. And I've got to think it'll be similar. It'll be like home and homes, right? You'll make an agreement with a school.
Yep.
We'll go to Colorado one year, you come to Syracuse the next year, and I bet you'll see arrangements like that once they figure out the financial details.
I think, too, if anybody remembers this urban legend, when Deion comes back to Syracuse, if they work this out, he can go over to NBT Bank Stadium and look for the diamond earring that's still somewhere in the infield there. There's a legend that he lost a diamond earring rounding second into third base, and it's still out there somewhere. I'd like to stress this is an urban. I don't even know if this is true or not.
Yeah, don't go dig up.
Don't go on the field. Yeah, don't be going out. The groundskeeper over there is Jason Smorrell. Shout out to the general manager of the Syracuse Mets. I'm sorry I even brought it up, but don't go looking for it. But that is a story that's out there that when Deion was down with the then Syracuse Sky Chiefs back in the day, I think Deion will remember that. Maybe he'll wander over and go to the lost and found at the front office. Anybody find a earring out there about 20 years ago?
Somebody on the grounds crew must have purchased like a metal detector and tried, right? Somebody had to have tried that.
I'm sure it's been found by now, maybe quietly in all that time. March Madness is here, Chris. And look, we've been well over this, why Syracuse is not there. And the portal opens in a few days. And all eyes turn to you, Alex Klein, to find some names to target in the portal. And can Syracuse pay these players? And I'll be just as fascinated as anybody who stays and goes. And all the transactions that are set to take place here imminently. Who knows when the first names will start leaving the Syracuse roster, and starting March 24th, the names that will be incoming to the Syracuse basketball roster. So we've covered all that, right? What I'm interested in, and you brought this question up, so I'll turn it over to you first. So who are we rooting for here? What's the deal with March Madness? When Syracuse, not that we root for Syracuse in our positions, but it's different when you're covering a team in March Madness versus when you're not. And we've gotten way too used to this time of the year, and Syracuse is not involved with it. So what is the B that turns into the A option here for March Madness when Syracuse is not involved?
Boy, you probably root for the ACC, right? No. Even with the reputation of your conference dwindling, and
it's not my conference. I don't care. I'm not Jim Phillips.
But if you're a Syracuse fan,
if you're a fan, maybe
that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking if you're a Syracuse fan, right? I'm putting on my. I'm pretending to be a Syracuse fan.
Okay, I got you. Yeah.
Who do I root for? As many upsets as possible, right? Like chaos. I mean, personally, like chaos, and that's probably what most Syracuse fans want too. Because who doesn't love an upset, right?
Well, and you got to root for your bracket. Right?
You got a roof for bracket. Yep.
This is the first year I can remember in a long time, Chris.
Patino. You got root for Patino, former Syracuse.
See, that's the
coach.
Answer. That's what I was trying to get at here.
St. John's, the Big East.
Listen, I squirm in my seat a little bit when I think about Rick Pitino. Winning kind of absolves everything in a way. How can you not root for St. John's and that story? And I remember, as well as so many people watching and listening to this as you do, Chris, when St. John's was St. John's, and the feeling that comes over you when you think about when the Big East was the Big East. It is so hard not to root for that, be immersed in that. The Big East still exists, by the way, but it's just not the same. Watching Creighton make a run, or Marquette make a run, or some of these faux Big East teams, if you will. And I'm talking about old school 1980s Lou Carnesecca St. John's. Rick Pitino's brought that back. That city has gone hog wild again. I was reading today, some of our friends from the New York Post, Chris. When's the last time that three writers
from the Post,
from the New York Post, went to an NCAA tournament site where St. John's was? I mean, St. John's hasn't been in the tournament a lot, but to send three of their best writers, shout out to my guy Mike Vaccaro being one of them. That's how big a deal this is. It feels bigger when St. John's is good, and it brings back all my warm, fuzzy memories of the Big East. So if I'm rooting for anything, as much as Rick Pitino, he's Slick Rick for a reason, but put that aside, how can you not root for that? That's where I'm at. That's my team now. That's what I'm rooting for. Other than my bracket, because this is the first year, Chris, in a long time, I have zero financial interest in March Madness this year. No, I have no money on the line. I'm not in any pools. I'm in our Syracuse Sports Insider bracket. Shout out to everybody that signed up for that, but we don't have any money on the line for that unless you win the ESPN bracket. Good for you if you do.
I don't either. I think it was and I think that's the product of checking out on basketball sort of early. It didn't matter. I didn't have to follow national college basketball for Syracuse reasons, and then like we got spring football, right?
Yeah.
As we talked about earlier, like I got things to pay attention to. Like I don't have time for this meaningless basketball. I think I'm with you on St. John's. Like I don't know if it's good for Syracuse because like St. John's might end up recruiting the same Northeast guys, but I am picturing some future year where a rejuvenated Syracuse team goes and plays a good St. John's team in the Madison Square Garden, and like that feeling that you mentioned, that old Big East feeling, we all got a little touch of that again. And I know that was your heyday. That was my heyday too, in terms of basketball.
The best.
I do root for most Big East teams except for UConn. Hurley has done a good job making himself a villain. So, I can enjoy watching. I grew up in Connecticut, but I can enjoy watching him lose.
I've got Connecticut going a little farther than most people in my Syracuse Sports Insider bracket. Just thought I'd note that. And listen, we brought it up earlier when he said, do you root for the ACC? And I was shaking my head. No, even if I was a fan, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what we're talking about. With the Big East, it felt like you were a part of it. This is our league, right? Yep. It's 12 years later, Chris, and I think most Syracuse fans had the same reaction I did. Why am I rooting for the ACC? I think the relationship that Syracuse has with the ACC right now is those that have a relationship with where they work. Okay, just because you work at Dunder Mifflin doesn't mean
you love Dunder Mifflin.
You love Dunder Mifflin. Yeah. The ACC is where Syracuse works. The ACC is who pays Syracuse. And I think that's the relationship that most see it as. Most Syracuse, I don't want to pretend I can speak for everybody, but most of the feedback I get from people is it is a sanitized business relationship. They've never felt welcome. Every year you hear it, I hear it. Oh, those refs, they hate those teams north of the Mason-Dixon line.
And Yankees. Those
Yankees. They don't like those Yankees. People have not shook that feeling yet. I don't think, have felt welcome in this league, and all for one for all. And what is the ACC these days? Stanford, California, SMU, it's like all over the place, right? That's why this Big East thing in St. John's still feels, again, the Big East has gone places that Dave Gavitt, God bless his soul, is like, we're where? What are we talking about here? But that's what I'm rooting for. That's what I'm watching for. I will say this. I'm going to pull up a couple comments from our insiders.
You're rooting for Kadari. You're okay with that?
I'm fine with that. They should have never got rid of him, but that's a whole different conversation for a different day.
I am too. I'm not begrudging any athlete a life-changing paycheck. So good on you.
Doug S. says this, speaking of our conversation here, Chris, I became a passive consumer of the tournament versus active because it makes me angry and sad. March sadness has become a thing, referring to Syracuse not being there. John P. notes this. For some reason, this is the year where it really sunk in that Syracuse is not in the tournament for the fourth straight year, and I'm realizing the depths to which this program has fallen. Chris, I will never let Syracuse's, and again, I come from a different perspective than the fans do. I understand that. But March Madness is March Madness, man, okay? You wake up on this day knowing there's basketball on from noon to midnight, and that's going to be the case the next 4 days, and the upsets and the basketball and the brackets and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Like, you'll never get me to not be into that, okay? I'm all in on that no matter whether I see Syracuse or not. But I guess I come from it from a different perspective. I can get it from fans that are like, man, 4 years an Olympic/presidential run without Syracuse there, that's too long for me to invest in it. I get it.
It is still, to me, like the best 4 days in sports. Like, like you're checking the scores at work, you're sneaking out early to watch the games. Like that tradition still exists when I was young. And even without Syracuse in it and a reason to do the work locally on it, like the tournament does still give me that feeling. And I think it always will. I feel like it always will. As long as they don't, as long as the Power Two don't do their own thing, which is, we'll talk about that plenty, I'm sure.
Yeah, we will be talking about
over
that
over the next months and years.
Don't screw this up, okay? Greg Sankey, Tony Petiti, Jim Phillips, Jimmy Pitaro, I'm trying to think of some other names I should be putting on this list. Don't screw this up. And by the way, this is the one thing that is holding together college sports as we know it. Okay? Because this is what the NCAA has. If they didn't have this tournament and they didn't have this contract with CBS and the magic of what makes the tournament, we'd already be where you think we're going. Super conferences and the big four, big five, however you want to put it, stepping aside, doing their own thing, forming their own tournament. That all sounds just like a foreign concept right now. But if it weren't for this tournament, speaking to the heart of what college sports still is, all NIL and everything included, this still feels like college sports, like it did 10, 20, 30 years ago, even with all the modern amenities to it. And why some of the teams that are successful, Chris, like the SEC, they got 14 teams in. Now, why did that happen? Best league money can buy, right? But it still feels like college sports. So I would ask, don't screw that up. And here's the other thing that I will beg, borrow, plead, and steal to prevent from happening, though I probably am leading a fruitless cause here. Do not expand this tournament. Do not make it bigger. You don't need to. Nobody's calling for it. There is not a look at how many teams were we talking about that got screwed out of the tournament this year? 1, 2, maybe. Okay. Don't expand this thing. I don't know if you feel the same, but there are some things in life you don't need to upgrade. And I think the tournament is one of them.
You know, I know this isn't good talk radio or podcasting. It's not good podcasting. I don't feel strongly. Like if they expanded it by like another, I don't want another full round. But if they decided to make like 8 playing games instead of 4, or like, that's fine. Like I don't care. I don't care one way or the other. It doesn't do anything for me. It doesn't turn me off. It's just whatever.
That's how they get you, Chris.
Yeah, slippery
That's
slope,
how they
right?
get you, man.
Slippery slope.
Slow
I am
but
on
sure.
that slippery slope.
Oh, what's 2 more games? Oh, what's 4 more games? What's 4 more teams? Oh, it's more basketball. It's more basketball for you to bet on. Right? That's how they'll get you, man. No. It's fine where it is.
We got a strong no and a non-committal.
I will put my old man on the porch face and voice on and say, no, don't need it. Tournament's fine. Don't expand it. But that's just me, right? Madden Q had a fun question, too. I want to know the top 3 basketball teams you root against, and not Georgetown. Let's not be obvious here. I want to learn who you dislike. Chris, I'm going to do what you just did. I'm sorry. My guy, Madden Q, one of our more loyal Syracuse Sports Insiders, great follow on social media as well. I'm going to be kind of boring here. First of all, you can't tell me who do I dislike and then say, you can't say Georgetown. Like, yeah, the obvious answer is there, right? Like, you grow up in Syracuse, New York, and somebody says Georgetown, and it elicits a certain feeling, kind of what we were talking about with St. John's earlier, right? And those old Big East rivalries. But here's the thing, and maybe this makes me a bad representation of Syracuse. I don't hate Duke. I've never hated Duke. I've never understood why people hate Duke. I get it. Don't get me wrong, but I think that's a little overrated. I'm not somebody that grits my teeth when people talk about Duke. Here's another thing about me, Chris. I'm not a huge NBA fan. I don't even have a favorite NBA team. So it's not like there's a team I hate like Knicks or Heat or something like that. And there's barely any rivalries that exist in the NBA these days. So, Mancuse, I'm sorry to disappoint you. I don't even think I could get to 2 on that list at this point, beyond Georgetown.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's fun to watch Dan Hurley lose. I think
you could make him a villain. Yep.
I think it's fun to watch Kentucky fans lose their minds when Kentucky loses. Like, I don't know if I hate the team.
Sports. We're talking about sports.
Yeah. My other answers would probably veer into politics, and this isn't that kind of show. So, so we'll leave it at those 2.
Yeah, I just, and part of that is so many players come and go. There's, what used to answer that question a lot, Chris, were you mentioned it, Hurley, Pitino, but that list is so much shorter of the coaches that there's no Jim Calhoun's around. There's no Louis Carnesecca. How could you hate Louis Carnesecca? But Raleigh Massimino and all those names that fed into the rivalries, and they were familiar. They were there every year for how many years? Decades. in some cases. When Jim Boeheim would walk into an opposing gym for the 25th time, right? That's gone in college sports these days. That helps feed what Madden Cuse is referring to. Like, some of these coaches walk in, and I'm like, who are you again? Oh, you coach Virginia? Like, what? Where's Tony Bennett? Like, it's just, I'm still getting used to that.
Yeah. Virginia would have been a fun team to root against just because, like, you don't want to encourage that style of basketball. But with Bennett gone, you know, I'm not in the tournament. Yeah.
It's almost more players than teams these days. Like, you root against certain guys. I don't like LeBron, or I don't like, you know, if you don't like Cooper Flagg for some reason or whatever the case may be.
It's harder to get there with college guys, though. Like none of these guys have done.
There's no Patrick Ewings
have done anything so bad that, like, I can muster up much animosity towards them.
So I guess we're living in a peaceful Zen world in basketball these days. Sorry, Madden Cuse. I'm sure I'll think of a few more. I'll text you back if I think of some more there. But I think that is kind of a representation of where we are and how quickly things come and go and how hard that is to accomplish these days. Chris, any final thoughts here before we go watch some more basketball and head into the weekend and get ready for some spring practice reporting over the next couple of days?
Well, just stick with us through spring practice. We're all like, you know, I'm more excited to do my job, you know, this spring. Like, a lot of years I'm trudging out there to spring. It's like, oh, we got to get up early and, you know, watch this mediocre football team like get ready for another season. Like, I am more excited to get out there and do the job for our listeners and catch video and pass along nuggets than I've ever been. So I hope they'll stick with us, and I hope they'll really enjoy, you know, our spring football coverage.
I would echo that, friends. And again, we'll be doing plenty of podcasts. So make sure you subscribe and follow wherever you get your pods: Spotify, Apple, YouTube. Become a Syracuse Sports Insider. There's no better time to do it with as Chris said, the first thing we're going to do, we walk out of practice, we're going to get you that Ricky Collins video. We're going to give you the nuggets. What did we see? Who was at practice? Who was visiting that day? It's become a show at spring practice. There's been more people around these spring practices than ever. So all what you're going to need to know that they'll allow us to see, we will tell you all about on the text line, on the pod, and, of course, our coverage on syracuse.com. That's it for this edition of Syracuse Sports. Thanks to Chris Carlson. Thanks to you guys for watching, of course. We'll be back with you throughout spring ball and over the next couple of weeks. Enjoy March Madness, even though Syracuse is not a part of it once again. And we'll be back with you here on Syracuse Sports. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, everybody.